What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Like I said, I'm diving back into it. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to replace a power steering rack in a lot of these older Subarus. I know for Imprezas and WRXs before 2015 this will work. It'll work for a lot of older Foresters, Outbacks, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll show you guys where to start. All right, pretty quick, easy, and straightforward. I personally like to start by taking the wheels off on each side so that I can get to the tie rod ends. Take the nut off the tie rod ends and just knock it out and start with that. So let's get these wheels off and I'll show you guys the tie rod ends. All right, guys, so it's pretty simple. You want to start by getting this cotter pin out of the castle nut. So I just bent it up a little bit, and then I'm going to take a pair of pliers and kind of bend it straight as best as I can. Get the bottom one out as well, bend it straight. It's pretty straightforward, so I'm sure you guys can understand what I'm doing. Let me get both hands. We'll get this cotter pin out, and then the nut is just a 19. So you take your 19 millimeter and just zip it out. It's best if you have an impact, so you don't have to worry about trying to hold the tie rod in place from spinning. But let's focus on getting this cotter pin out, and then we'll get that nut off. Okay, so I forgot to mention this, but before I take the nut out, the nut off of the outer tie rod and drop the tie rod out, I like to break this jam nut loose, because if you don't break this loose while it's on the car, the new power steering rack usually will not come with a outer tie rods already attached. So you're gonna have to take these off and thread them onto the new power steering rack. So if you don't have the knuckle holding your outer tie rod in, this outer tie rod will most likely just spin if you're trying to break this jam nut loose with it out of the car. So I like to go ahead and break these free. I sprayed mine down with a little bit of PB Blaster before, or as I was working on the other stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and break this free on both sides. Then we will take these nuts off. I already got the cotter pins out, and then I'll show you guys an easy way to get these tie rods out of the knuckle. Now I just do the same thing on the other side, and then we can move on to the next steps. All right, now that we've got both cotter pins or both tie rod ends out, disconnected from the knuckles, this is where it's gonna make this part of the job way easier if you're doing an engine and you already have the engine removed. But basically, the hardest part of this whole job is these two little fittings right here, A and B. One's for the high pressure line, one's for the low pressure line. So getting to these with the motor in the car from underneath is very, very difficult. If you have the axle out, it makes it a lot easier to do, but I figured with all the leakage we've got going on this power steering rack, you guys can see pretty much how bad it is. But I figured since we're doing head gaskets on this engine anyways, and we have it out, we might as well replace this. So you're gonna need a 14, a 17, and a 19 for these fittings here. So let's go ahead and disconnect these, and then we'll move on to the next step. Cool, so now that those are disconnected, we can move on to the next step. It's kind of a pain to get to that one in the back, even with everything here. But if you angle your wrenches right, you can get it off. These are obviously a little bit rusty, so they're kind of seized on there, but not too bad. If you have some stubby wrenches, that would help even more. But now let's move on to the next step. Pretty much what I'm going to do is go into the car, make sure the steering wheel is completely straight, so that when we disconnect this steering shaft coupler right here. There's a 12 mil bolt that goes through it. When we disconnect this, we can make sure that the steering wheel is completely straight so that when we put the new power steering rack in, it'll be centered and our steering wheel won't be off center. So let's go ahead and go inside the car. Go inside the car, make sure the steering wheel is completely straight. We'll come back, take that 12 mil off, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, steering wheel is completely straight. Let's get that pinch bolt out of the steering coupler, and then we'll move on. Okay, we're under the car, and we are on the driver's side, underneath the driver's side axle. And as you can see, here's the coupler. There's this 12 millimeter bolt right here. I have a 12 millimeter wobble on a nice long extension that I'm going to get in here. Try your best not to turn that steering shaft. That 12 millimeter bolt is out, and we're good to move on to the next step. This should just wiggle off. If not, it might take a little bit of convincing with a pry bar or something, but continuously make sure that your steering wheel is straight inside the vehicle before you mess with this too much. So let's go make sure that's straight one more time, and then I'll show you guys what to do underneath. Okay, so now that we're under the car in the middle, we're ready to drop the rack. So we have this little cradle underneath this, and I'm going to clean this off really good before I put it back in. But you have 10 14 millimeter bolts. You got one right there, two right there, one right here, one right here, two in the back in the middle, and then again 3 on this side as well. So a total of 10 14 millimeter bolts. This cradle should drop, and then we'll move on to taking the power steering brackets out. All right, now that we've got that cradle off, we can drop the 2 brackets that actually hold the rack in. The first bracket on the driver's side also has 2 or 4 14 millimeter bolts. There's one here, one up there, one in the front, 2 in the front. And then on the driver's side, you got just a simple one with 2 14 mils, one here and one in the back. So should be pretty simple to drop. Let's get those 2 brackets unbolted, and then we'll probably have to hammer that steering shaft down just a little bit to convince it to pop out, and this whole rack should just pop right down. And I can try and show you guys how I like to slide it out. If not, you can disconnect the sway bar end links or the sway bar brackets here from the subframe on each side. I think they're 12 mils, 2 12 mils on each side, and then this whole sway bar will fall out of the way and you can just slide the rack out. So let's get those brackets off and we'll go from there. Okay, I ended up dropping that sway bar out of the way just to make this a lot easier for myself. Let me get a hammer real quick. There we go. Like I said, I'm going to hold it so it doesn't just drop. And it's almost out. That should be it. All right, and she's out. And that is the removal process. So installation is pretty much the opposite. I will swap all the parts over from this rack onto the other one. I'll show you which ones I have to swap, what O-rings need to be swapped, and then we'll get the new one back in. So hang tight. All right, next day. Now that we've got the old power steering rack out, we can start transferring everything over. We've got the new power steering rack here, and it looks like what we're going to need to transfer over is the jam nuts, the tie rod ends, and these 2 hard lines here. So for the jam nut and tie rod end, you want to get a 14 millimeter and put it on the inner tie rod, and you can get a 19 millimeter and put it on the outer tie rod. And what you want to do is have your tie rod end facing up and you'll just hold it in place and spin it off. Of course, mine's going to be really tight, so I'm going to have to do this with both hands, but I'll basically show you the process. You'll want to spin it off and count the revolutions that you spin it off for it to go back on. So once you do a full 360-degree turn, that'd be 1 revolution. So you want to count the number of revolutions to get it off, so that way you can thread it back on the same number and hopefully get your alignment as close to it was before as possible. So that's how to get those off. And then over here for the hard lines, you have a 17 millimeter on the top, and you want to break that free. Be very careful. And then you have a 14 millimeter down here on the bottom. So you want to just break those free, loosen them up, and then these 2 hard lines will come off. I believe it's on a bracket over here secured by a 10 millimeter bolt. So you want to take that little bracket off there and transfer that over as well. And then before you transfer these hard lines over, just to make it easier on yourself, you can put these brackets on just like kind of something like that. A little bit tight in there, but that one will go on like that. And then this one, you'll want to transfer over this little rubber sleeve as well. So let me get both hands on this stuff. I'll transfer everything over, and then I will show you guys what it looks like with this all assembled, and we'll get it back in the car. Easy enough. The tie rods are on both sides with the jam nuts on as well. 2 hard lines are on. Brackets are on. And it's ready to go back in the car. So let's get underneath it. We'll bench press this thing and get it back into place. All right, so with that sway bar dropped, this is gonna be a lot easier. So we want our 2 brackets in their general place. And we're going to carefully line up each side, get our little boots and everything past these brackets. Might take a little convincing to get it up in there. And then we want our main bracket. Let's see what we're getting stopped on. These arms, we'll just bend them out of the way for now. We gotta get it past these bolts for the lower control arm on each side. I already got it past the one on the driver's side. Now it's past the one on the passenger side. And that should be close enough. We can start a couple of our bolts. You want to just line up all your stuff, make sure everything clears the subframe. We'll start with one of these bolts over here on the passenger side. Maybe. You do have to kind of bench press it up in there. Make sure everything's lined up. Really helps with 2 people, but you gotta do what you gotta do. It's not that bad. Press it up in there. I'll try and get this bolt at least started. There's that one. And then we'll come over here with some of these longer bolts. And they go in this bracket over here through the actual rack itself. So we'll push that up in there. Really got to hold it up in there with your thumbs and your hands. Sometimes it's easier to start the other bracket or the other bolt in this bracket. Just depends on what you can line up easiest. Get this one started in the back, the diagonal one. But you guys get the point. We'll get all 4 of these bolts in. Then we'll worry about the steering column shaft U-joint thing. Then we'll go from there. Now that we've got the rack back in, I'll go back under in a bit. I'll put that sway bar back up, put the links or the brackets back where they go, and put the 212 mils back on each side. For now, I went back in and one last time, made sure that steering wheel was straight. And then I'm just going to finesse this back onto the shaft. And let's pray we don't have to drop it back down. We might have to drop it back down to get the shaft back onto the U-joint. So, yep, keep that in mind. You probably will have to line the shaft up before you bolt the rack back into place. So, don't be stupid like me. Put the shaft back into the U-joint before you bolt the rack all the way back up. So, let's do that. We'll get this shaft back into place, and then we're just going to tighten these two unions, these two fittings down here, and it'll pretty much be done up here, and we can move to the outer tie rods. Okay, now that we've got all the top side buttoned up with the U-joint and the two lines for the hoses, we came over here and pushed the tie rod back into the knuckle a little bit. I'm just going to whack it up just a tiny bit with the hammer so I can get that nut started. There we go. And that is poking through enough to get that nut started on there. So let me find that. We'll get that started on there like this. Easy enough. Then we'll zip it down with the gun. And then we'll line up our holes. It's gonna be kind of hard to see, but we'll line up our holes for the cotter pin, put the cotter pin back in, and we'll basically be done. Just do the same thing to the other side. And other than that little cradle piece that goes underneath, we will be done. So let me get these cotter pins in, let me get it on the other side, and we'll finish this puppy up. All right, guys, she's pretty much buttoned up. Just to recap, we've got the two brackets underneath. This one on this side had four 14mm bolts that went up into it. This one on this side underneath had two 14s that went up underneath it. We've got our two union or fittings here that are back together. These are a pain in the ass, so be really careful not to cross thread these or strip them. I undid this bracket right here to give me a little bit of play in how these sit so that I could start those and get them tightened a little easier without cross threading them. The 12mm pinch bolt is back through the steering U-joint. The outer tie rods are back into the knuckle with the castle nut and cotter pin back in. And the wheels look straight here, but the steering wheel is not perfectly straight. So hopefully they'll be able to fix that in alignment. Like I said in the beginning of the video, it'd be ideal to have one of those spring-loaded steering wheel holders to hold the steering wheel in place while you're doing this job so that you don't get one tooth off or two teeth off when putting that column back into the U-joint. But that's pretty much it, guys. Other than that little bracket, that guy that goes underneath, other than that, this job is done. It's so much easier with the engine out. These racks are known to leak, so hopefully this video helped you guys out. Like I said, if you need to do it with the engine in the car, it'd probably be easiest to just take that axle out on the passenger side to give yourself better access to those two union fittings. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. I hope this video helped you guys. Like I said, they're known to leak, so hopefully somebody can find use of this video. It's pretty easy and straightforward. So I have faith in you guys. I really appreciate you guys watching. See you in the next video. Peace out.